Let's continue talking about long-term aggregate supply curve. Okay? And as we already mentioned in the previous video, long-term means all prices, no matter it's final products or the inputs, their prices are flexible. Okay, nothing is sticky, right? And we also use the assumption which we made back in chapter 3 that says the economy's productive resources are given. Okay? In other words, in terms of capital, labor, technology, and land, they're not growing. Okay? And if they're not growing, then how much this economy can produce would be given, all right? Because you don't have more resources like more workers or more technologies to use. Then if the allocation of existing resources is efficient, then you should already reach your potential. Okay, and if this is true, then on the graph we would find that the long-term aggregate supply curve is vertical. Okay, it's a vertical straight line. Now this means no matter how high or how low the overall price level is, the economy just going to produce the exactly same amount of output. Okay, here white bar means the long-term potential, okay, or potential GDP defined and discussed before. Okay, once again, this should be easy to understand after our discussion of the short-run aggregate supply curve. Okay, because here we said every price is flexible, it's adjustable. So when the overall price level either go up or go down, then the relative price among the goods and services should stay the same, because every change is made proportionally. Okay. In other words, a bike manufacturer should not quit producing bikes and join the marijuana industry, or vice versa. Marijuana farmers should not quit producing marijuana and start making bikes. Okay, because the ratio of these prices stays the same. Okay, and so how much the economy can produce is actually or ultimately determined by how much resources they have. Okay, so this is one way you can understand this. Another way you can understand this as straight line potential GDP is, again, as we said before, you can take this as a long-term average. Okay, because it's an average, then it's given. It doesn't matter what the overall price level is. Okay. All right. Now let's put aggregate demand, short-run aggregate supply, and long-run aggregate supply, all three curves together on the same graph. Okay. Now before I switch to the next slide and talk about this the three curves, I would strongly encourage you to pause the video and try this on your own. Okay, based upon what we already discussed, put the AD and short-run aggregate supply curve on the graph, and then add the LRAS long-term or long-run aggregate supply curve to that graph. Okay, and see where are you going to put the LRAS, and how are you going to make sense of the graph you make. Okay, now you can go ahead and do that. All right, now let's come back and put all three curves on the same graph. there are three possibilities, okay, or three possible graphs. The first one, again, we put the aggregate demand, which is downward sloping, in the short run aggregate supply curve, okay, which is upward sloping. So we should be able to find the intersection between these two curves, which is the equilibrium point, E, okay, and then this is the overall price level at the equilibrium, and this is the equilibrium output, okay. Now we have to add the long run aggregate supply curve, right? Suppose it's here. In other words, the LRAS lies to the right hand side of point E, okay. And we find that here LRAS crosses AD, okay? And that means here we also find a long run equilibrium point, okay? And this is called E bar, okay? And we have the long run equilibrium overall price level, P bar, in long run equilibrium output level, which is Y bar. Once again, the Y bar is the potential GDP, okay? Now, how could we explain the difference between E and E bar? As we already mentioned, E bar is for long run and E is for short run, because this is an intersection between the aggregate demand and short run aggregate supply, right? So E is the short run equilibrium and E bar is a long run equilibrium, okay? We also find that because E lies on the right hand side of the E bar, left hand side of the E bar, so we find that in the short run, the output, the equilibrium output, is lower than the potential output, Y bar. That means here on this graph, we are actually showing you a contraction, okay? In other words, if you remember what I showed you before, that Fred chart, this means if the long run aggregate supply is the trend line, okay, shows the long run average output level, then here at this moment, the economy produces less than the potential GDP, then it's long run average, okay? That means the economy suffers, okay? It's in a recession or a contraction, okay? It produces less than it's supposed to be, okay? Then it's what the productive resources could potentially produce, okay? So this is the first possibility. The second possibility is, again, we start with the short run equilibrium, okay? The same point E, but we could put the LRAS on the left hand side of E, like this, okay? Once again, we would find an intersection between the aggregate demand and long run aggregate supply, okay? And this intersection point tells us the long run equilibrium, E bar, okay? And the long run overall price level, P bar, and the potential GDP, Y bar. However, this time we find that the long run aggregate supply curve lies on the left hand side of the short run, right? That means here on the horizontal axis, the short run output level is higher than the potential GDP. In other words, this graph actually shows an expansion, okay? So in the short run, where the economy is now, it produces more than what it's supposed to be for a given amount of productive resources, okay? You could say that, the economy is booming, or even the economy might be a little bit overheated, okay? Overheated means, we produce too much, okay? it may not be sustainable in the long run. Okay, and that's why the long run average is lower than this. All right. Now, before we talk about the third possibility, let me clarify one thing. So you find that we focused upon the intersection between the aggregate demand and short-run aggregate supply, and the intersection between aggregate demand and long-run aggregate supply, right? You find we never talk about the intersection between SRAS and LRAS because this intersection doesn't make any economic sense. Okay, the short run versus long run, when these two are equal, again, it doesn't have any economic interpretation. Okay, it doesn't represent equilibrium. Okay, keep that in your mind. The equilibrium would be an intersection between a demand curve and a supply curve. The intersection between two supply curves does not have any economic interpretation. It has nothing to do with the equilibrium. Okay. All right. Finally, let's check out the third possibility. When all three curves cross each other at the same point. Okay. Here again, AD, SRAS, and LRAS, they all cross the same point E, and again, it's pretty easy for us to understand. This means the short-run equilibrium overlaps with the long-run equilibrium. Okay? In other words, the economy is currently producing at its potential level. Okay? Or if we plot the real GDP, then this means the short-run fluctuating curves just cross the long-run trend curve. Okay, so the economy again reaches its potential in terms of the output. All right. Now here, once we understand how we're using the graphical tools to show business cycles, including contraction, expansion, and the long-term equilibrium, now we're gonna talk about the shift of these curves. Okay, so in the next video, we're gonna start with the components or the factors that could shift the aggregate demand, and then we're gonna talk about the components or factors that could shift the short-run aggregate supply. Okay, and based upon that, we could have a deeper understanding of the causes of short-run deviation of the economy from its long-run potential level.